Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today we are going to continue our discussion about morale and how to increase it in your workplace. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secret podcast. I'm Kale Houser. Thank you for joining me today. All right, so we left off the last episode in talking about schedule and how important it is, and I was in the middle of a story that happened to me about scheduling while I was a flight commander with the Air Force and in charge of my own flight, the health, welfare, and feeding of my flight. Mainly, a large part of that job was the schedule and figuring out the flying schedule to make sure all of our flying obligations were met while we were on shift, what we were required to do. So if you recall, and if you haven't listened to that episode, before you continue to listen to this episode, please go back and listen to that so you don't pick up this story mid-sentence. You'll be a little bit lost. But as a quick recap, I became a flight commander. We're getting screwed out of our additional family day vacation days that the commanders had given the base around holidays to turn 3-day weekends into 4-day weekends. If you didn't know that happened in the military, yes, that happens. It's a way of, considering we are 24/7 on duty, that the commander kind of provides these additional days to spend with family. But us being in our Air Force squadron, being 24/7 operations, and we flew, whether it be Christmas Day or 4th of July or a random Tuesday, we were flying. Short of being weathered down, we were flying all the time. And we had to have coverage for those shifts 24/7 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So I had told myself, man, this is really unfair that the rest of the base, all these other career fields that are getting paid the same as me, they're, wear the same rank as me, are getting these extra free days of vacation. It's just kind of rotten. It's one of those things that just doesn't sit well with you. And I told myself if I ever became a flight commander, I was going to do something about it. And I was able to, in looking at the schedule, without being a burden to anyone outside of my own flight, get everybody from our youngest ranking, youngest person, to our most senior, which was me, because I was the commander of our flight, a 4-day weekend plus or minus a week of the actual holiday. And it might have been 2 weeks, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, that wasn't kind of the point. The point was everybody got a 4-day weekend that they otherwise would not get. And they had not gotten in the history of our squadron. Now, to be fair, we did around Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's, we did this huge, crazy convoluted, it took somebody looking at that thing as just a passion project for weeks to figure out all the moving parts of, all right, you can take leave. And this wasn't free vacation. This was just, you were allowed to take your leave, your vacation time, and you had to pick, right? So a certain amount of people got to take Thanksgiving off, but that meant you were working Christmas and New Year's, and then vice versa. You got to take Christmas off, and that meant you were working Thanksgiving and New Year's and then New Year's and blah, blah, blah. You get the point. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about all your other holidays, your Memorial Days, your Labor Days, 4th of July, President's Day, all those other bank holidays that the military gets and they got free vacation for. So I told myself, yep, I'm going to do this. And I was able to do it. I went to my flight. I asked their permission, said, hey, this is what I do. There is a slight cost to it, but we're going to keep it all into ourselves. But the big payoff is you get 4 days off in a row without burning leave, because it's what you've earned and what you're entitled to, just as part of being in our organization. And surprise, surprise, nobody was against it. They're like, sweet, you mean I get a 4-day weekend? It might not be 4th of July, but it'll be a week later and I can just leave and, not the local area. I can't go to Spain or anything, but, they could not have to come to work. And they're like, yeah, sweet, sign me up. And that's what we did. So I had mentioned that I received pushback. This was a good deed that went punished. Not officially, but certainly indirectly from my fellow flight commanders. And it surprised me. Now, like I had said, I had gone to them and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I was the senior guy. I was the senior captain at the time because I was just older as I cross-flowed into the MQ-9 world. But I went to them just out of respect and hey, we're all flight commanders here. We talk to each other all the time because we have to make sure all this is covered, and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is how I did it. It didn't take me that long, legitimately, 15, 20 minutes of looking at the schedule and kind of moving the pieces around and plugging people in different spots. And I said, you might want to think about doing that for your flight because, people are going to see that my flight's getting 4-day weekends and they're not. And why is that? Okay. And the key critical part here is I got advance permission from our commander. Because again, this is the military. Commander is in charge. I was under no illusions that I could just haphazardly do whatever I wanted with my flight. Like, no, these are his people. They're on loan to me to help figure out their schedule and do all the performance reports and stuff. And I got his permission. He's like, sweet, go for it, man. Which, incidentally was one of the few meetings that I had with this commander. He was just that type of person. But in telling them, so I had one fellow flight commander go, well, can you do that for my flight? Figure out his flight schedule in order to get all of his people the 4-day weekends. And I go, well, no. It took me back a little bit. And he was actually, to me, appeared a little bit upset and offended that I would not take my time to figure out his flight schedule. And again, as flight commanders, that was essentially one of our biggest priorities or biggest job duties. Being a flight commander was figuring out the schedule of our flights. And when I say flights, I mean my team, my group of, what did we have? Less than 20. I'd have to go back and do a count, but say roughly 15 to 20 people, just to make sure we covered the flying schedule. And he was the same thing. He was in charge of, whatever it was, 15 to 20 people, and he had the same responsibilities to them as I did to mine. And I had no responsibilities. In fact, it was kind of frowned upon that I would meddle whatsoever with their schedule or their performance review process or their award recognition process. And in fact, we were in a little bit of competition, especially when it came to awards, because we all wanted people from our flight to get the awards. So it kind of surprised me when he goes, hey, can you do this for my flight? And it was basically, I don't want to say it was out of laziness, because I don't think that was the case. There weren't really any lazy. I think it was more out of I'm already so busy. I don't want to take the time to put this in. And I'm like, dude, this took me 15, 20 minutes of looking at the schedule and getting it all figured out. No big deal. But I turned him down. I said, nope, that is your responsibility. It's not my responsibility to work it for your flight. I certainly could have as a way to be nice, but that wasn't at all the point of it, certainly. The point of it was, this is something that I saw was important, and you, as a flight commander of your people, for whatever reason, you are not recognizing the importance of this and the power that we've been given as flight commanders by our squadron commander to implement this policy in order to increase morale and make everybody's quality of life better. He just wasn't on board with that. And me being, an older person, I think probably a good 10 years older almost, if not 10 years or more. It took me back a little bit that this fellow flight commander didn't recognize it. And that's not even really the worst of it. The worst of it is, and again, we're talking scheduling stuff. We're talking things you can do with your schedule to increase morale and increase quality of life in your organization, okay? And that as you go through these processes, you may receive pushback. And the thing that surprised me the most was we had one of the other, and he wasn't even a flight commander, he was just another fellow captain, actually came back and says, "You are not allowed to do this." And I'm like, okay, please explain. Yes, this is against the rules. You cannot give out free vacation to people. And so being, again, an older person and legitimately 10 years older than this individual, and my assistant flight commander was awesome. He was totally on board, and he was one of those super, super smart dudes that he reads the regulation once and he'd go, well, actually, according to paragraph 3.2.6, it says this and this, right? Like a phenomenal person to have on your team. And thankfully, he was on my team at that time. So thank you very much. You know who you are if you're listening. So I said, to this one that was telling me I couldn't do this, please explain. Like, oh, the rules say that you can't do this. And, I forget the exact thing he quoted, but he quoted a part of our instruction, our Air Force instruction, whatever number it was. And that appeared to say that you couldn't do it. And I said to him, well, first of all, no matter what those rules say, our squadron commander said I could. So at that point, I'm covered. that squadron commander now has taken, should a higher commander than him come down and say, what are you doing? You're not allowed to do this. He has taken responsibility for that decision. Okay. So you got to understand that dynamic, especially when you're in a command type of scenario. And it's no different if you as a department head go to your CEO and the CEO says, yep, that's a great idea. Go ahead and do it. I give you my blessing. That CEO has essentially accepted responsibility for that decision. Okay. And that was the case. So that kind of brooks all like, hey, the big boss said I could. That's good enough for me. We're going to go do it until proven otherwise, or until he or she says no. And then secondly, and this goes back to my assistant flight commander, he goes, well, actually, you referenced this big bullet statement that said this, and then if you actually read one sentence more as the sub-bullet to that bullet, it said, with the exception of 24/7 operational units that don't get, it was essentially, nobody was allowed a 4-day pass throughout the Air Force. And then underneath it was, with the exception of 24/7 operational units by the discretion of the commander, right? So that was the get out of jail free card. But it blew my mind that somebody actually went into the regulations, and you had to dig to find this. This wasn't like a well-known, like everybody just reads the regulations just for fun, right? Although my assistant flight commander, I suspected that he might do that. But somebody actively went in to figure out a way that they could make this not be a thing. They legitimately, whether they were, I don't know if they were threatened by it, if they didn't like the idea that somebody else had the good idea and they didn't, and they were afraid that I would be seen as higher, which was never my motivation as I was a flight commander. I wasn't there for myself. I understood that my responsibility was to my flight, to my people, and that if they rose, then I would rise, right? It wasn't about me achieving and then pulling them up. It was about me pushing them up, and we were all being successful together. But the point being is, I found these pockets of resistance that in my mind didn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, why would you not be on board with this? This is such a fantastic idea, and you benefit from it. You now get 4-day weekends with your family, and you've got a young child at home. Like, why would you not want this? You should be doing everything to, if you did find something that says it's not allowed, you should just kind of bury that, or like, get rid of that regulation, because this is to your benefit and the benefit of the whole. Like, in both of these scenarios, they were completely incapable of seeing how this positively affected our squadron. Now, unfortunately, I left the squadron not too long after this, so I didn't get to take too much advantage of it, but I understand that they kept it in place. It actually became just part of the flight commander's responsibilities. And I hope that is still the case now, because that is a phenomenal way that people, especially when other organizations within our same organization, so right, Air Force as a whole, base as a whole, squadron gets treated differently than other squadrons and other career fields. But because, the unique situation of the military mindset, you kind of compare yourself to others. Like, well, why does that person get 4-day weekends and I don't? So big, huge, long story. It was a very big defining moment in my life, certainly in my view of leadership and my view and understanding that not everyone is like me, and that not everyone has a desire to be a good leader. And certainly they do, I won't say that they're actively trying to be a bad leader, but it just really comes down to a lack of perspective and a lack of understanding that there are things that you can do to kill morale, and there are things that you can do to raise morale. I was trying to do the raise morale thing, and they were focused really on the kill morale part of the equation. So this goes back to the beginning of the podcast, talking about scheduling. Your schedule in your workplace, especially if it is something that is in flux and fluid and not a set 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, 9 to 6 or anything else, is critically important. Do not ignore it. Make sure that you actively seek input on it. You continually analyze it. You don't just be like, okay, yep, we're doing this and we're going to let it go. But you revisit it, especially as you have new employees come onto your team or new team members that depart, and your situation changes, okay? So I hope you got benefit out of that story. I hope it wasn't too convoluted for you and went around in circles by any stretch. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and benefit from it. Really think about how that applies to your situation, how that applies to your leadership journey. Are you the one that looks for reasons to not implement good ideas? Or are you the one that looks for reasons like and understand like, wow, this could be really good for our organization and for our team. And I really see the benefit of this. Yeah, it may cost something, but you're able to weigh those cost benefits. So yeah, thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it. Please feel free to shoot me an email at kale@kalehouserleadership.com. That's KALE at kalehouserleadership.com. I really appreciate any and all feedback, and I look forward to talking to you. Hey, no matter where you're at in the world, have a fantastic afternoon. Bye.